benefits of gratitude, some very surprising. I mean, not only will gratitude help you to develop a more positive mindset, but it can reduce cortisol and stress, which benefits your cardiac function. It can reduce the symptoms of depression and anxiety. It can improve your emotional resilience and your focus. It can improve the quality of your sleep. It can improve the quality of your immunity. It can improve your ability to bond socially with people. And it's also associated with these other general health benefits like fewer headaches and fewer infections and even fewer digestive problems. Cicero called gratitude the mother of all virtues. And he meant that grateful people are more generous. Grateful people are more compassionate. Grateful people are more patient. Grateful people are more kind. And you know that to be true from your own experience. The most beautiful and inspiring people you know are probably also the most grateful people. And so you didn't need me to tell you that gratitude is powerful. I mean, it's been demonstrated scientifically. It's confirmed experientially. We all know that gratitude is extremely powerful. We all know that we ought to feel more grateful. But we also know that gratitude is not reflexive, certainly not reflexive, and it's not natural. As powerful as it is, it doesn't come to us automatically. It doesn't come easily. You know that you ought to feel more grateful, generally speaking. And you know that you ought to be more thankful to God specifically. So why aren't you? Why aren't we more grateful? What gets in the way? I mean, I think the obvious obstacle on the surface, at least, is envy. Envy is a chief obstacle to gratitude in our life. And none of us wants to think of ourselves as an envious person. But you know, like, you feel great about your house. You're very grateful for the house that you live in. You love your house until you go to your friend's house after they've redone their kitchen. And then you say, my house stinks. Like, where did I go wrong? My life is worthless. What have I done? Right. Maybe you feel the same way about your children. Envy is a driver of ingratitude. And if you want to diagnose our cultural moment right now, then you can point to two long-term trends. And one of those is that, on one hand, we've seen interest in church decline and less engagement with one of the primary engines of gratitude in life. And at the same time, we've increased our engagement with engines of envy, like our phones and like social media, which is a cliche and a sermon trope at this point, so I'm not going to belabor it. But it's no wonder that we're in a bind. And lurking beneath envy is another E word. It's entitlement. Right? The belief that I deserve in some way, like privileges or special treatment or a positive experience. It's the last thing that parents want to instill in their children, right? Like, you want your children to clear the dishes, not expect that someone else is going to come and clear the dishes for them. And we can't exempt ourselves either, because entitlement shows up in all kinds of places. None of us wants to think of ourselves as entitled, and then you go to the airport. Right, like I waited recently at an airport desk for 6 whole minutes. Or it comes out when you're in traffic and someone won't let you merge onto I-35, the breaker on-ramp that just spits you right into the lane. And people come flying by at 80 miles an hour and won't let you on. And it makes you so angry. And then when you go home the other way on 35, you cut in line to exit 183 North because it's backed up for a mile and a half. But I don't know anything about that. And we can laugh about the entitlement in our life when it plays itself out in these sort of petty and inconsequential ways, but entitlement also lurks behind, like, a great many of our worst societal sins. Because anger is usually not a response to pain, it's a response to the idea that I deserve to not feel pain, and that I'm entitled to the pleasant life experience of my choosing. Like, that I have the right to have a good time, and that it's unacceptable to me to go without the good things that I want, right? Let alone suffer or have very painful things happen to me. And so in that way, entitlement gives birth to resentment. And entitlement is the root of resentment. And so these are the things that get in the way. We know gratitude is very powerful. We know we should feel more grateful. We want to feel more grateful. And there are things that get in the way, and we're envious and entitled. And so, how can envious and entitled people become grateful? How does that change happen? Well, there are two things that for sure don't work. And the first thing that doesn't work is that being told to be more grateful doesn't work. So, which makes my job interesting this morning. Being told to be grateful doesn't work. If it worked that way, then like parents would be able to love their children, right? Say thank you to your grandma and mean it, right? But they don't mean it. And telling them to mean it is not going to make them mean it. It doesn't work. And it doesn't work on adults either. It doesn't work on 40-somethings. In his book, The Happiness Curve, the journalist Jonathan Rauch wondered why, like across demographics and across time, people in their 40s are the least happy. And he traced it to disappointment, sort of disappointment according to expectations, because by the time you're in your 40s, even if you've been successful, all of the things that you thought would bring you happiness and contentment have had opportunities to disappoint you along the way, and they've started to bring you less. And this is important to keep in mind because what we're told is like, well, you need to count your blessings, and you need to make a gratitude list. And that's not a bad idea, but gratitude lists are not silver bullets. And Jonathan Rauch recounts his experience like this. He said, "Counting my blessings, as I did on the threshold of 40, was a worthy exercise morally. I'm glad I did it. But I'm no longer surprised that it didn't help. Unknowingly, by trying to explain to myself why I ought to be more satisfied, I was giving myself more reason to dwell on the gap between how satisfied I felt and how satisfied I thought I should feel." So being told to be grateful does not work. The second thing that doesn't work is like just a raw accumulation, right? We think, well, if I had blank, if I could just get to blank, if I could just proceed to blank, then I would feel content, or I would feel happy, or it would at least be a little bit easier for me. And like that's so patently untrue that you barely need to say it, right? That, like the people with the most things are not the most content, and they're not the most grateful. If you've ever spent time in a developing country, you know this to be true. But if you can't get to a developing country, then just spend like some time in the more affluent areas of Austin. Like we are not known for being grateful and gracious people. And it's an inconvenient truth that having more doesn't produce more gratitude. So being told to be grateful doesn't work, and getting more stuff doesn't work. Where does genuine gratitude come from? I mean, it's true sometimes it's a mindset, and you have to be grateful and you have to be thankful, you know, in spite of the circumstances, and even when you don't feel it, you still have to thank God. Like, that's true. But when you feel it, where does it come from? Like, what are the conditions in which it's genuine and it's not forced and it's just, and even as unnatural as gratitude is to us, it seems to come naturally. I think the passage that we read earlier has something to teach us about where unforced gratitude comes from and what to do with it when it comes. So we're going to walk briefly here through Luke 17. And we saw that Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. And what he's going to do in Jerusalem when he gets there is he's going to die. And he's traveling in this in-between place along the border between Samaria and Galilee, which will become important later. And he's walking into a village. And as he approaches this village, he's spotted by, the text says, 10 men who had leprosy. Now, leprosy in the Bible doesn't always mean the sort of worst case scenario leprosy that we might think of. Sometimes it means that. Sometimes it means just any other skin condition. Any number of seemingly contagious diseases. And because they have a contagious skin disease, they have to be outside the city, and they are in quarantine. And this is why it says they stood at a distance. Leprosy meant that they were ceremonially unclean. They were socially unclean. They had to camp outside the city or the village. They couldn't come within 50 paces of uncontaminated people. It's way more than 6 feet. They can't be at home. They can't work. They can't go to the temple to worship. They're cut off from their family, cut off from their friends. They're cut off from God, according to the structure of their religion at the time. They're total outcasts. And they were very commonly regarded as being under some kind of divine curse because that fate was so undesirable and so pitiable. And so the leprosy, whatever the disease is, it comes to define their life, and it defines their existence in the community. And what's interesting is that Everywhere in the ancient literature, you sort of see this, both in the Bible and outside the Bible. People with leprosy are called lepers, but not here. The author of this account of Jesus' life, who we call Luke, he calls them men with leprosy. And that's in the original Greek text, not lepers. Men with leprosy. He does the same thing in chapter 5. A man who was full of leprosy. I just think it's interesting that Luke is utterly unique among ancient authors in distinguishing the person from the affliction when it comes to leprosy. Everyone else just says lepers. Even Jesus just calls them lepers in Luke 4. Right? There were many lepers in Israel at the time of Elisha, and not one of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian. So it's interesting because of who Luke was. Because Luke was not one of Jesus' original 12 disciples. Luke was a physician by training, and he compiled his account based on testimony from people who were associates and witnesses of Jesus. And he uses this very precise language, just like a physician would, to talk about the condition. And it's this very humanizing description of the person. And it dignifies the most needy people. And that's something that kind of starts to become clear, actually, if you read Luke's whole account of Jesus' life. It's that the gospel, like the good news of the reality of Jesus Christ, the true message of Christianity, it will always persist. It will always be relevant. It will always have power in the world because there will always be needy people. And people who are spiritually needy and emotionally needy and certainly materially needy people. And the Gospel of Luke shows us that Jesus was like a magnet for needy and weak, unclean, excluded people. And these 10 lepers are the epitome of that kind of person. They have nothing. They can do nothing. They're cut off from their entire life and everyone they love and everyone who loves them. And they're in the most desperate position. And they called him Jesus Master. And evidently they knew who he was. Maybe they heard about that he had healed another leper. And they call him Master. It's like a word that only Luke uses in the New Testament. It indicates that they recognize him as having some sort of like spiritual authority and miraculous power. And so even in their address to him and in their request for mercy, there's something like faith. And so Jesus' response is sort of interesting. Because they're calling out asking for mercy and healing, and what does he tell them to do? He says, when he saw them, he said, go show yourselves to the priests. I mean, you might expect him to touch them, or at least let them know that they have been healed, but Jesus tells them to go to the priests. The reason why is because the priests were the arbiters of ceremonial and social cleanness. They functioned as like the health inspectors. In redirecting them to the priests, Jesus is abiding by the Jewish law's prescription for this very situation. And that's found, by the way, if you want homework for this week, this is found in Leviticus 13 and 14. 2 very long chapters detailing 2 very complicated processes. So upon the discovery of a skin condition, the afflicted person would be presented to the priest. And Leviticus 13 contains instructions on how the priest would assess the severity of that condition. And if the condition meets certain criteria, then the sick person is sent outside the city until they're well. So just until further notice. And if the condition happens to remediate, if somehow they're healed or it goes away, then they have to call for the priest, who will come out and the priest will check them again. And this is Leviticus 14 now. And if the disease is gone, then there's a very specific special ritual for ceremonially cleansing and restoring the person to civic life and to religious life. And when you read it in Leviticus 14, the ceremony is so incredibly complicated. It takes multiple sacrifices. It takes 8 days to complete. And so it's interesting. I mean, the 10 lepers do what Jesus says, and they're eager to initiate this process because it takes a long time. They've been cut off from everything for a long time, and they know that at the quickest they're going to be reintroduced to their family and everyone they love is 8 days. And so they're quick to go. And it's another indicator of their faith that they believe they'll be healed when they get there. Because you're not supposed to show yourself to the priest until you're healed. And so if they walk away with spots, they must believe we're not going to have them by the time we go. And sure enough, this is what happens. Verse 14 tells us, as they went, they were cleansed. And one of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. and we start to differentiate this one leper from the other 9. Jesus had worked a miracle on all 10. All 10 had a need. All 10 asked for mercy. All 10 received mercy. All 10 got the miracle. 9 of them were brought to health. 1 of them was brought to God. And this one leper has the correct response to mercy. He has the correct response to grace. Only he truly has his spiritual eyes opened to see that Jesus has the power to heal like far more than his leprosy. And so he does what the other 9 ought to have done, but didn't. He does what the priests ought to do when they see these 10 men standing before them healed. He does what we ought to do every single day. He comes back, praising God in a loud voice, and he throws himself at Jesus' feet and thanks him. All 10 had their lives radically interrupted by grace, but only this one looks past the gift to see the goodness of the giver. And the key detail in the mind of the author is that this one is a Samaritan. Luke withholds that detail until this very moment in the story, specifically so it would have this effect. Samaritans were ethnically mixed people. They descended from intermarriage between Jews and Gentiles in the northern kingdom of Israel. And the Samaritans practiced Judaism, but they had their own temple, their own priests, and their own system. And so there was ancient beef between Jews and Samaritans, and pure Jews didn't associate with Samaritans. It was societally forbidden. And so this is why Jesus zeroes in on it. And he has this great moment where he's like, well, can we check the math on this? Like, just checking the till here, buddy. We're not 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Evidently, this one, this foreigner, was the furthest from being in a position of deserving. And that's why it goes deepest for him, because he was the least entitled to God's help according to the social conventions of his time and place. So for him, the healing is much more than skin deep. And there's a principle operating in the Samaritan leper's experience, and it's demonstrated in his response. And it's not an easy pill to swallow, but here's the principle. The principle is that you only feel grateful for everything if you've been reduced to nothing. That may not be what you came to church to hear this morning, but that's what we see here. And we actually see, there's a real life example of this in the life of a woman named Erin Callan. You probably don't know her name. I didn't know her name until recently. Erin Callan, at one point in time, though, was the most powerful woman on Wall Street. She spent 12 years ascending the org chart at Lehman Brothers, and eventually she was named Chief Financial Officer. And it was September of 2007. And just as Erin Callan earned her way into the C-suite, the subprime mortgage crisis cratered the American economy. And over the next 9 months, Lehman Brothers lost $4 billion in assets, and shareholder value fell 75%. And Erin Callan was forced to resign in June 2008, and Lehman went under 3 months later. And years after this, Erin Callan reflected on her experience in the New York Times. And here's what she wrote. She said, "I didn't start out with the goal of devoting all of myself to my job. It crept in over time. Each year that went by, slight modifications became the new normal. First, I spent a half hour on Sunday organizing my email, to-do list, and calendar to make Monday morning easier. Then I was working a few hours on Sunday, then all day. My boundaries slipped away until work was all that was left. Inevitably, when I left my job, it devastated me. I couldn't just rally and move on. I did not know how to value who I was versus what I did. What I did was who I was. Sometimes young women tell me they admire what I've done. As they see it, I've worked hard for 20 years and can now spend the next 20 focused on other things, but that's not balance. I don't wish that for anyone. Even at the best times in my career, I was never deluded into thinking I'd achieved any sort of rational allocation between my life at work and my life outside. I've also wondered where I would be today if Lehman Brothers hadn't collapsed. In 2007, I did start to have my doubts about the way I was living my life, or not really living it. but I felt locked into my career. I'd just been asked to be CFO. I had a responsibility. Without the crisis, I may never have been strong enough to step away. Perhaps I needed what felt at the time like some of the worst experiences in my life to come to a place where I could be grateful for the life I had. I had to learn to begin to appreciate what was left. I mean, what a thing to say. She came to feel grateful for being fired, for losing her job, her company going out of business, the whole economy convulsing. It was the only way she could learn to begin to appreciate the life that she had. Who in your life would you describe as grateful? Who's the most grateful person you know? What really turns an envious, entitled, resentful person into a grateful person? I would bet that the most grateful person you know is someone who has suffered great loss, or is someone who has endured really significant hardship and pain. It's someone whose cancer nearly killed them. It's someone whose child was in the NICU. It's someone who was betrayed or horribly mistreated in the past. It's someone who is in recovery for addiction. I mean, you can go to a 12-step meeting and you're very likely to hear someone introduce themselves and say like, hello, I'm George, and I'm a grateful alcoholic. And they don't mean like, I'm grateful to be here, although they probably are. Like, what they mean is, I'm grateful to be an alcoholic because alcoholism brought me to God. And that's a heavy, heavy thing to say, especially if you're the person suffering in that way. But that's how people talk when they've learned the secret. And the secret is that if you want to come to God, you can only come as someone who is undeserving and as someone who is unentitled. And to the extent that you feel you're not getting what you deserve, you'll be resentful. And to the extent that you feel that you've received the goodness that you don't deserve, you'll be grateful. In our passage this morning and everywhere else in Scripture, the people who welcomed Jesus most enthusiastically were always the people whose lives had stripped them of their illusions of deservedness. Right? I mean, the Bible calls them sinners, but they're just people. And they're people whose only way of receiving Jesus was as a gift, and not as something that they deserved, certainly not as something that they were entitled to. And the true message of Christianity, what we call the gospel, has unique power for needy people, for hurting people and broken people and regretful people and failing people and hopeless people. Because they're the ones who really get it. And they're the ones who are really grateful. And unforced gratitude comes from that place. Unforced gratitude, the real thing, it comes from the awareness of deep healing. The Samaritan in our passage this morning was like a lightning rod for the electricity of God's mercy because he was unclean and because he was a foreigner. And here's what I know about you that you don't know, but really you do know it. And that's that you're the same. You're a foreigner. Like you feel like a foreigner. You're single and all of your friends are happily married and you feel like a foreigner, right? Or you actually, all your friends are breaking up and getting divorced and you actually love your husband and it makes you feel like a foreigner. Or you're new to Austin and you feel like a foreigner. Or like you've lived in Austin long enough to see the city become a caricature of itself and you don't recognize it anymore and you feel like a foreigner. Or you're the least wealthy of all of your friends and it makes you feel like a foreigner. Or you feel so self-conscious about being the one wealthy one in your friend group that you feel like a foreigner. Or you have a child who is doing like pretty okay or just sort of generally well and they're very well behaved and you feel guilty that you have it easier than other parents and it makes you feel like a foreigner. Right? Or you have in fact a very difficult child who is always like throwing fits and crashing out and taking off their clothes at the grocery store and you're embarrassed of your child and you're envious of other parents and it makes you feel guilty and it makes you feel like a foreigner. And the fact of the matter is, the point is that it doesn't matter what your experience is, we're all foreigners. We all feel this in some way inside, and we all feel unclean in some way. If we're willing to get in touch with it, We know what it's like to feel like our very identity is accused because in whatever way is most important to us deep down, we don't feel like we're good enough. So you don't feel like you're good enough at your job. You don't feel like you were good enough for your parents. You don't feel like you're good enough for your wife. You thought by now you would be a better parent. Or you have like regret and a guilty conscience about something because you did something that can never be undone. And you did something that you can't take back. And what is it in your life, what is it about you that makes you feel like an outsider or a foreigner? What is it about you that makes you feel unclean? Or that makes you wonder if you've been cursed by God? I mean, if you can identify these areas in your life where you feel like a foreigner and where you feel unclean, then you can do the only thing with them that you can do, which is to bring them to Jesus and say, Jesus, have mercy on me. I need you. I'm an unclean person. I'm a foreigner. And you love me because I'm unclean, and you love me because I'm a foreigner, and so I come to you as an unclean foreigner. That's what I am. Have mercy on me. And that's what this week's activity in the practice guide, that's what I hope it will help us do. Because it's going to give us an opportunity to sort of reflect on God's provision of mercy in our lives. And as you reflect, I want you to try and think in these terms. So when did God meet me at the point of my deeply felt need? When did I feel like a foreigner and God welcomed me? When did I feel like an unclean person and God healed me? And as you reflect, what might happen is that God may give you the gift of gratitude. And it is a gift. Like genuine, unforced gratitude, it's a gift in itself. It's a door that only opens from the other side. And when you're not grateful, and you know you ought to feel more grateful, and you wish you could be more grateful, you're powerless to make yourself more grateful. Right? A leper can't change his spots. And you can't make yourself grateful. It's a gift. It's something that we can only get by grace. You can't achieve it. You can't acquire it. You can only receive it. And just like the fruit of the Spirit, it spoils under self-consciousness. So the more we try and force ourselves to be grateful, the more gratitude kind of slips through our fingers. And here's the hope for us this morning. The hope for us this morning is that even though our hearts are inconsistent, and even though our gratitude will never be commensurate with the gift that we've been given, the source of the gift never changes. And his mercies are new each day. And he is the same yesterday and today and forever. And he is not reduced one iota by your inability to conjure a little gratitude. So unless we turn this into like some kind of transactional thing, just remember that Christ doesn't revoke the gift of healing from the other 9 who forgot where it came from. Any gift that's premised on the recipient's correct response is not a gift at all. But that's what grace is. Grace is love that's not owed. It's just freely given to people who aren't entitled to it. And the Christian life, a life of worship, is a response because it's lived in response to grace and not in order